The bullet grazed so close to Olivia Drummond's ear that she felt the heat of it before she heard the crack of the rifle. And in that heartbeat, she knew that stopping meant dying. Her boots slipped on loose rock as she scrambled up the mountainside, fingers clawing at scrub brush and granite, lungs burning in the thin air of the Montana Territory. Behind her, voices echoed off the canyon walls, men shouting directions to each other as they spread out to cut off her escape routes. She had been running for 3 days now, ever since she had witnessed what she was never supposed to see in the back room of the saloon in Bannack. The year was 1875, and Olivia had made the mistake of arriving in town with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate need for honest work. She had taken a job cleaning rooms at the Silver Strike Saloon, asking no questions and keeping her head down, which had served her well enough until Tuesday night. She had heard the arguing through the thin walls, the sound of furniture breaking, and then the single gunshot that ended it all. When she had pushed open the door to see if anyone needed help, she had found 3 men standing over a body, and they had seen her face just as clearly as she had seen theirs. The dead man was a federal marshal, and the killers wore the badges of local law. Olivia had run before they could draw their weapons, crashing through the back window and into the alley, cutting her hands on the glass but feeling no pain through the terror. She had grabbed her small bundle of possessions from her rented room and fled into the darkness, heading for the only place she thought might offer sanctuary. The mountains rose like jagged teeth against the star-filled sky, and she had remembered hearing that there were mining camps scattered through the high country, places where a woman might disappear among the transient population of prospectors and drifters. But the corrupt lawmen had come after her with a determination that spoke of their desperation. They could not let her live to tell what she had seen, could not risk her testimony reaching the territorial authorities. So they had tracked her through the wilderness with the patience of wolves, and now she was climbing this brutal slope with the last of her strength, her water gone, her food exhausted, her body pushed beyond what she thought possible. The mountain was called Eagle's Peak by the locals, a towering mass of granite and pine that dominated the landscape north of Bannack. Olivia had no idea what lay on the other side, no plan beyond the animal instinct to keep moving upward, to gain height and distance from the men who wanted her dead. Her dress was torn in a dozen places, her legs bleeding from scrapes and cuts, her hair wild and tangled with twigs and pine needles. She looked like something that had crawled out of a nightmare, but she was alive, and she intended to stay that way. The slope grew steeper as she climbed, the vegetation thinning until there was nothing but bare rock and patches of old snow that clung to shaded crevices. Her hands were numb from cold and exhaustion, but she kept moving, pulling herself up one handhold at a time. The voices below grew fainter, and she allowed herself a moment of hope that perhaps she was finally putting distance between herself and her pursuers. Then her foot slipped on a patch of ice, and she was sliding backward, scrabbling desperately for purchase on the smooth granite. Her fingers found a crack in the rock, and she clung to it with everything she had, her legs dangling over empty space as loose stones clattered down the slope and disappeared into the abyss below. She could hear the men shouting with renewed excitement, having heard the sound of her fall, and she knew they would be climbing faster now, sensing that their prey was weakening. With a sob of effort, Olivia pulled herself back onto the slope and kept climbing. Her vision was starting to blur at the edges, dark spots dancing in front of her eyes, but she refused to stop. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, beating down on the exposed rock face and baking her with heat that made her head swim. She had not drunk water in over 12 hours, and her tongue felt thick and swollen in her mouth. The summit seemed impossibly far above her, a knife edge of rock against the brilliant blue sky, but there was nowhere else to go. Down meant capture and death. Staying still meant the same. So she climbed, pulling herself up inch by painful inch, until her muscles were screaming and her breath came in ragged gasps that did nothing to fill her lungs with the oxygen they craved. She did not know how long she climbed. Time seemed to stretch and compress in strange ways, moments of crystal clarity followed by gaps where she moved in a daze, her body operating on pure instinct while her mind drifted elsewhere. She thought of her family back in Ohio, all dead now from the fever that had swept through their town 3 years ago. She thought of the dreams she had harbored of making a life in the West, of finding honest work and building something meaningful. She thought of how stupid she had been to believe that running was enough, that determination alone could save her. When her hand finally reached up and found level ground instead of another slope, she almost did not believe it. She dragged herself over the lip of the summit and collapsed onto flat rock, her chest heaving, her vision swimming with exhaustion. For several long minutes she simply lay there, unable to move, barely able to think. The sun beat down on her back, and she could feel consciousness starting to slip away from her like water through her fingers. Then she heard the sound of boots on stone, and terror gave her the strength to lift her head. A man was standing 10 feet away, silhouetted against the sky so that she could not make out his features. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the dusty trail clothes of a cowboy, and there was a gun belt around his waist. For one horrible moment she thought that her pursuers had somehow gotten ahead of her, that this was the end after all her struggle. "Easy now," the man said, and his voice was low and calm, the kind of voice you would use with a spooked horse. "I am not going to hurt you." He moved closer, stepping out of the sun's glare so that she could see his face properly. He was perhaps 25 years old, with strong features tanned dark by years of outdoor work, and eyes the color of creek water in summer. There was concern in those eyes, and something else that might have been recognition, as if he had been expecting to find someone in distress but was still shocked by the reality of it. "There are men," Olivia managed to croak, her voice barely recognizable as her own, "chasing me." "I know," the cowboy said. "I heard the shots earlier, been watching their progress up the mountain. They are still a ways back, but they are coming steady." He crouched down beside her and pulled a canteen from his belt. "Here, drink slow or you will make yourself sick." Olivia reached for the canteen with shaking hands and brought it to her lips. The water was warm and tasted slightly of leather, but it was the most wonderful thing she had ever experienced. She forced herself to follow his advice, taking small sips even though every cell in her body screamed for her to gulp it down. "What is your name?" the cowboy asked while she drank. "Olivia Drummond." "I am Carter Finnegan. I have a camp about half a mile from here on the north slope. Been up here tracking a herd of wild horses that I have been trying to catch for the better part of 2 weeks. Saw you climbing about an hour ago. Watched you make that last push to the summit. That took real courage." Olivia lowered the canteen and looked at him properly. Carter Finnegan had the weathered look of a man who spent his life outdoors, with the kind of lean strength that came from hard work rather than idle time in a gymnasium. His hair was dark brown and needed cutting, curling slightly at his collar, and his hands were scarred and calloused. There was a rifle slung across his back and a revolver on his hip, but he wore them with the casual ease of someone who carried tools rather than weapons of aggression. "I saw something I should not have seen," Olivia said, her words coming easier now that the water was reviving her. "In Bannack. 3 deputies killed a federal marshal and I witnessed it. They have been hunting me ever since." Carter's expression darkened. The deputies in Bannack are corrupt as they come. Everyone knows it, but no one has been able to prove anything. You are saying you can testify to murder. If I live long enough to testify. Well then, we had better make sure you live. Can you walk? Olivia tried to push herself up and found that her legs were trembling so badly they would barely support her weight. Carter caught her elbow and steadied her, his grip firm but gentle. All right, walking is going to be slow going. We need to get you off this summit before those men arrive. The north face is a lot steeper than the way you came up, but there are places to hide, and I know the terrain. Do you trust me? It was a strange question under the circumstances, but Olivia found that she did trust him. Perhaps it was the honest concern in his eyes, or the straightforward way he spoke, or simply that she had no other choice. Either way, she nodded. Good. Stay close to me and step where I step. Some of these rocks are loose, and a fall from up here would not leave much to bury. He kept hold of her arm and led her toward the far edge of the summit. Olivia could hear voices now, echoing up from below on the south face. Her pursuers were getting close. Carter heard them too, and he picked up the pace, half leading and half carrying her across the broken ground. The north face of Eagle's Peak was indeed dramatically steeper than the route she had climbed. Olivia looked down at the sheer drop and felt her stomach lurch, but Carter was already moving, finding handholds and footholds in the rock face with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. He went first, testing each hold before allowing her to follow, talking her through every move in that same calm voice. They had descended perhaps 50 feet when they heard shouts from above. The deputies had reached the summit. Olivia froze, her heart hammering in her chest, but Carter squeezed her hand and pointed to a narrow ledge that ran horizontally across the cliff face. It disappeared around a bulge in the rock, and he guided her toward it, their movements agonizingly slow as they worked their way across. The ledge was barely wider than her boot, and the rock face offered few handholds. Olivia pressed herself against the stone, her fingers finding tiny cracks and nubs of rock to grip, her eyes fixed straight ahead because looking down would mean panic and death. Carter moved beside her, one hand always ready to catch her if she slipped. And after what felt like an eternity, they reached the bulge of rock and worked their way around it. On the far side, hidden from view of the summit, was a cleft in the rock face that opened into a shallow cave. Carter helped her into it, and Olivia collapsed against the back wall, her whole body shaking with reaction. The cave was barely large enough for both of them, perhaps 6 feet deep and 4 feet high, but it was shelter and concealment, and at that moment it felt like the most secure place in the world. Carter positioned himself at the entrance, peering carefully around the edge of the opening. Olivia could hear the deputies clearly now, their voices carrying down from the summit. She could not have just disappeared, one man was saying, his voice rough with anger and exertion. Maybe she fell. That climb would kill most men, let alone a woman. This voice was younger with a touch of doubt in it. We would have seen her fall. She is here somewhere, hiding. Spread out and search the area. There was the sound of boots on rock and then silence. Carter stayed motionless at the cave entrance, barely breathing, and Olivia forced herself to do the same even though her lungs were crying out for air. Minutes crawled past like hours. Then one of the deputies appeared on the ledge they had just traversed, working his way carefully along it, his eyes scanning the rock face. He was perhaps 30 years old, with a cruel face and a star pinned to his vest that should have represented justice, but now only represented corruption. He had a gun in his hand, and Olivia could see his finger on the trigger, ready to shoot at the first sign of movement. The deputy was looking in the wrong direction, his attention focused on the cliff face above rather than the cave hidden beside him. He was no more than 10 feet away, close enough that Olivia could see the sweat staining his shirt, close enough that if he turned his head, he would look directly into the cave and see them huddled there. Carter had drawn his revolver, moving with such slow care that there was no sound. He held it ready but did not aim, clearly hoping that violence would not be necessary. Olivia held her breath, every muscle in her body tensed. The deputy muttered something under his breath, words that Olivia could not quite make out, and then he was moving back along the ledge, working his way toward the summit. They listened to the sound of his progress fade, and still Carter did not move. More time passed, and then they heard the deputies calling to each other from various points around the summit. No sign of her on this side. Nothing here either. Maybe she did fall after all. Or maybe she went down the north face. We should follow. Are you insane? That is a sheer drop. She could not have climbed down there, not in her condition. Then where is she? There was a long pause, and then the older voice spoke again, heavy with frustration. We will search the area below the summit in case she fell and the body got hung up in the rocks. If we do not find her by nightfall, we go back to town and report that she died in the mountains. No one is going to question it. What if she survived? What if she makes it to another town and tells what she saw? Then we deal with it when it happens. But look at this mountain. Look at how far she climbed with no supplies, no water, no food. Even if she somehow got down the north face, she is alone in the wilderness with nothing. She will die out there one way or another. The voices faded as the deputies began their descent back down the southern slope. Carter stayed motionless for another full hour before he finally allowed himself to relax. He holstered his revolver and turned to look at Olivia. That was close, too close. Olivia found that she could not speak. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the full weight of everything that had happened was crashing down on her. She had been running for 3 days, had climbed a mountain with men trying to kill her, had nearly been caught multiple times. The terror of it all suddenly overwhelmed her, and she started to shake, tears streaming down her face before she could stop them. Carter moved closer and, after a moment's hesitation, put his arm around her shoulders. It was a gesture of comfort rather than anything improper, and Olivia found herself leaning into it, grateful for the simple human contact after so long alone and afraid. "You are safe now," Carter said quietly. "They are gone and they will not find you. I promise." "They were right about one thing," Olivia managed between sobs. "I have nothing. No supplies, no weapons, no way to get to safety, and they are going to be watching the trails out of these mountains. Then we will not take the trails. I know ways through this country that most people have never heard of, and you are not alone anymore. I will help you get to Virginia City. There is a territorial marshal there who is honest, one of the few. You can give your testimony to him." "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." Carter was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Because it is the right thing to do, and because I have seen too many bad men get away with too much. If you can put those deputies in prison where they belong, then helping you is the best thing I have done in a long while." There was sincerity in his voice that made Olivia believe him. She wiped at her tears, trying to pull herself together. "Thank you. I do not know what else to say except thank you." "No thanks needed, but we should stay here until dark. It will be safer to move then, and you need rest." "When was the last time you slept?" Olivia tried to remember and could not. "I do not know. Before I ran from Bannack. Then sleep now. I will keep watch." "I could not possibly sleep, not with those men out there searching for me." But even as she said it, Olivia felt exhaustion pulling at her like a physical weight. Her body had been pushed beyond its limits, and now that she was finally safe, even temporarily, it was shutting down. Her eyelids grew heavy, and despite her protests, she felt herself drifting. The last thing she was aware of was Carter's arm still around her shoulders, solid and reassuring, and the sound of his breathing in the enclosed space of the cave. Then sleep claimed her, deep and dreamless. When Olivia woke, the light filtering into the cave had changed from the harsh brightness of midday to the softer gold of late afternoon. She was lying down, her head pillowed on what she realized was Carter's jacket, and there was a blanket draped over her that had not been there before. Carter himself was sitting at the cave entrance, silhouetted against the sky, his attention focused on the landscape below. Olivia sat up slowly, her body one massive ache. Every muscle protested the movement, and her hands and legs throbbed with pain from the cuts and scrapes she had accumulated during the climb. But she was alive and safe, and for the first time in 3 days, she felt like she might actually survive this ordeal. "How long did I sleep?" she asked, her voice still rough. Carter turned and smiled at her, and the expression transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her breath catch slightly. "About 4 hours. You needed it. How do you feel?" "Like I climbed a mountain while being shot at." He laughed at that, a warm sound that filled the small space. "Fair enough. Are you hungry? I have some dried meat and hardtack in my pack. It is not much, but it will give you some strength." "I would eat anything right now." Carter produced a canvas pack from somewhere behind him and pulled out strips of jerky and pieces of hard biscuit. Olivia ate slowly, forcing herself not to wolf down the food even though her stomach was cramping with hunger. The jerky was tough and salty, the hardtack nearly impossible to chew, but it was sustenance, and she could feel energy slowly returning to her body. While she ate, Carter told her about his camp on the north slope, where he had supplies and his horse. "My plan is to wait until full dark, then lead you down to the camp. We will spend the night there, let you recover some strength, and then head out at first light. It will take us about 4 days to reach Virginia City, moving carefully and staying off the main trails." "4 days," Olivia repeated. "Will your supplies last that long?" "I have enough for both of us, though we will be eating light, and I can hunt if we need fresh meat. The bigger concern is making sure those deputies do not spot us. They will likely head back to Bannack tonight, but they might leave someone watching the mountain, just in case. I am sorry for bringing this trouble to you." "You did not bring anything. I chose to help, and I am glad I did. Besides, life was getting boring just chasing wild horses." "This is more interesting." There was a teasing note in his voice that made Olivia smile despite everything. "I am glad my near-death experience is entertaining for you." "That is not what I meant," Carter said quickly, looking mortified. "I just meant that helping someone who really needs it feels more worthwhile than the usual routine of my days." "I know what you meant, and I am grateful, truly. I do not know what would have happened if you had not been here." They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the shadows lengthen across the mountainside as the sun sank lower in the west. Olivia found herself studying Carter when he was not looking, taking in the details of his appearance. He had strong hands, she noticed, with long fingers that moved with surprising grace when he checked his rifle or adjusted his pack. There was a scar on his left forearm, pale against his tanned skin, and she wondered what story lay behind it. As if sensing her scrutiny, Carter glanced over at her and their eyes met. For a moment neither of them looked away, and Olivia felt something shift in the air between them, a connection forming that was more than just the bond of rescuer and rescued. Then Carter cleared his throat and looked back out at the landscape, and the moment passed. "Tell me about yourself," he said after a pause. "Where are you from? How did you end up in Bannack?" So Olivia told him her story, starting with her childhood in Ohio, her family's death from fever, and her decision to head west in search of a new beginning. She spoke of the journey by train, and then stagecoach, the strange mixture of hope and fear she had felt as she watched the landscape change from green farmland to endless prairie to these harsh mountains. She told him about arriving in Bannack with almost no money, taking the job at the Silver Strike Saloon because it was the only work she could find, and the terrible moment when she had opened that door and seen the marshal's body. Carter listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she described the deputy's pursuit. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "My story is less dramatic," he said finally. "I grew up on a ranch in Colorado, learned to ride before I could walk properly. My father raised horses, and I worked alongside him until I was 22. Then he died. My mother had passed years before, and the ranch went to my older brother. I took my share of the inheritance and headed north, figuring I would make my own way as a horse trader. I have been working in Montana for about 3 years now, catching wild horses and selling them to ranchers who need good stock. You like the work, most days. It is lonely sometimes, spending weeks at a time in the mountains with only horses for company. But it is honest work and I am my own boss. That counts for something." "It counts for a lot," Olivia agreed. As darkness fell over the mountain, Carter prepared to lead them down to his camp. He helped Olivia to her feet and checked to make sure she could walk steadily. Her legs were stiff and sore, but they held her weight, and she nodded to indicate she was ready. The descent was treacherous in the darkness, with only starlight to show them the way. Carter moved with the sure-footedness of someone who knew every rock and crevice, and Olivia followed as closely as she could, trusting him to guide her safely. Several times she felt her foot slip on loose stones, and each time Carter's hand was there to steady her, his grip strong and reliable. The north slope was heavily forested, unlike the bare rock of the southern face, and they moved between towering pines that blocked out even the faint starlight. Olivia could hear the sounds of the mountain at night, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of some small animal in the underbrush, and once, far in the distance, the howl of a wolf. Each sound made her tense, expecting at any moment to hear the voices of the deputies, but Carter moved with confidence and gradually she began to relax. After what felt like hours of careful descent, Carter stopped and pointed ahead. "There, you can just see the campfire." Olivia looked and saw a faint glow through the trees, warm and welcoming. The sight of it brought tears to her eyes. It represented safety, shelter, and the end of her desperate flight, at least for tonight. Carter's camp was simple but well organized. There was a canvas lean-to strung between 2 trees, a fire pit ringed with stones, and his horse tethered nearby, a beautiful buckskin gelding who nickered softly at their approach. Carter had clearly been living here for some time, as there were supplies stacked neatly under the lean-to, and signs of previous fires in the pit. "Sit by the fire and warm yourself," Carter said, stirring the coals back to life and adding fresh wood. "I will see about getting you some better food than jerky and hardtack." He produced a small pot from his supplies and began preparing what turned out to be a simple stew made from dried vegetables and more of the jerky. But after days of running with nothing to eat, it tasted like the finest meal Olivia had ever consumed. She ate slowly, savoring every bite while Carter tended to his horse and checked the perimeter of the camp. When he returned to the fire, he brought another blanket with him. "You should take the lean-to tonight. I will sleep by the fire and keep watch." "You do not have to do that. You need rest too. I am used to light sleeping out here, and I will feel better knowing you are comfortable and safe." Olivia wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her again, and the thought of lying down under shelter was too appealing to resist. She took the blanket, and made her way to the lean-to, which was just large enough for one person to lie down comfortably. The ground beneath was covered with pine boughs that made a surprisingly soft mattress, and as she wrapped herself in the blanket and rested her head on Carter's rolled-up jacket again, she felt the last of the tension drain from her body. "Carter," she called softly. "Yes, thank you. For everything. You are welcome. Now get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." Olivia closed her eyes and let sleep take her. And this time her dreams were not of running and gunshots, but of a quiet campfire and a man with creek water eyes who had appeared at the summit of a mountain when she needed help most. The next 4 days passed in a strange rhythm that was both exhausting and oddly peaceful. Carter led them through the wilderness on paths that only he seemed to know, away from established trails and settlements. They traveled mostly on foot, with Carter's horse carrying their supplies and occasionally Olivia, when the terrain was particularly rough or when her injured legs needed rest. During the long hours of walking, they talked. At first the conversations were simple, focused on immediate concerns like where they would camp that night or what direction they should travel. But gradually, as the miles passed and the immediate danger faded into background worry, they began to share more personal stories. Carter told her about growing up on his father's ranch, about learning to read a horse's temperament and earning its trust. He spoke of the Colorado mountains with obvious affection, describing spring meadows filled with wildflowers and winter storms that could bury a man in minutes. He talked about his brother, who had inherited the ranch and promptly married a woman who made it clear that Carter was no longer welcome. That pain was still fresh enough that his voice tightened when he mentioned it. Olivia, in turn, shared memories of her family, of her father who had been a schoolteacher and her mother who had grown the most beautiful roses in their county. She spoke of her younger sister, who had dreamed of becoming a nurse, and her older brother, who had wanted to be a lawyer. The fever had taken all of them within 2 weeks, and Olivia had been left alone with a grief so enormous that the only way she could survive it was to leave everything behind and start over. "That is why I came west," she admitted on the second day, as they stopped to rest beside a clear stream. "I thought that if I went far enough the grief would not be able to follow me. But it did anyway. It is always there like a weight I carry." "Grief does not go away," Carter said quietly, "but it does change. It becomes less sharp, more of an ache than a knife wound. And eventually you learn to carry it without it dragging you down." "Is that what happened with your father?" "Yes. I still miss him every day, but I can think about him now without it hurting so much. Mostly I just feel grateful that I had him for as long as I did." They camped that night in a small canyon where a spring created a natural pool of clear water. Carter set up the lean-to for Olivia again and made his own bed on the far side of the fire, maintaining a respectful distance that she appreciated even as part of her wished he would sit closer. She was drawn to him in a way she had not expected, attracted not just to his obvious physical strength and capability, but to the gentleness with which he treated her, the thoughtfulness evident in every action he took for her comfort and safety. On the third day, they climbed a ridge and looked out over a vast expanse of mountains and valleys stretching to the horizon. The view was breathtaking, and Olivia stood beside Carter, feeling very small and very alive in the face of such wild beauty. "Does it ever stop amazing you?" she asked. "This landscape, never. Every time I think I have seen the most beautiful sight these mountains have to offer, they show me something new. It is like they have infinite secrets, and I will never live long enough to discover them all." "That sounds like a good problem to have," Carter laughed. "I suppose it is." He turned to look at her, and Olivia was struck by the intensity in his gaze. There was something in his expression that made her heart beat faster, a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun beating down on the ridge. For a moment she thought he might say something, might put into words the connection that had been growing between them with every mile they traveled together. But then his expression shuddered, and he looked away. "We should keep moving. I want to make it to Wolf Creek before dark." They walked in silence for the next hour, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Olivia found herself very aware of Carter's presence beside her, of the way he unconsciously adjusted his pace to match hers, of how his hand would hover near her elbow when they crossed rough ground even though he did not actually touch her. She wondered if he felt the same pull she did, the same growing attraction that made her think about him even when her mind should be focused on survival. That evening, as they set up camp near Wolf Creek, Carter caught 2 rabbits with snares he had set earlier in the day. He cleaned and roasted them over the fire, and they ate the fresh meat with an appetite sharpened by days of travel. Afterward, as the fire burned down to coals and the stars came out overhead, they sat together in companionable silence. "We should reach Virginia City tomorrow evening," Carter said eventually. "You will be safe there, able to give your testimony. The territorial marshal will make sure those deputies face justice." "And then what?" Olivia asked. "What do you mean? I mean, what happens after I testify?" "I cannot go back to Bannack. Those deputies have friends, and even if they go to prison, someone might come after me seeking revenge. I have no money, no prospects, no plan. I have been so focused on survival that I have not thought about what comes next." Carter poked at the fire with a stick, his expression thoughtful. "You could stay in Virginia City. It is a bigger town than Bannack, more opportunities for work. Or you could head further west, try your luck in California or Oregon, more running, more starting over. Sometimes starting over is not such a bad thing." "Is that what you have been doing? Starting over, in a way?" "After my father died and I left Colorado, I had to figure out who I was without the ranch, without that life I had always expected to live. It was hard at first, but eventually I realized I liked being on my own, making my own choices." "You ever get lonely?" The question was more personal than Olivia had intended, but Carter did not seem offended. He considered it seriously before answering. "Yes. Sometimes I go weeks without speaking to another person, and that solitude can wear on you. I tell myself I prefer it this way, that I am not cut out for town life or close relationships, but there are nights when I wish I had someone to talk to, someone to share all this with." He gestured at the mountains around them. "Maybe you just have not found the right person yet." "Maybe." They sat in silence again, but this time there was a tension in the air, an awareness of things unsaid. Olivia could feel Carter looking at her, and when she turned to meet his gaze, she saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes. He wanted to close the distance between them. She could see it clearly, but he was holding back, keeping himself in check. "Olivia," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "These past few days, traveling with you, getting to know you, it has been different from anything I have experienced before. You are different. Strong and brave and kind, and I find myself thinking about you even when I should be focused on keeping us safe." Olivia's heart was hammering in her chest. "I think about you too, constantly. That is the problem. I do not want to take advantage of the situation, of your gratitude for my help. You have been through a terrible ordeal, and your emotions are probably all mixed up. The last thing I want is to make things more complicated for you. You are not taking advantage. What I feel has nothing to do with gratitude, or at least not only that. Carter, you make me feel safe, but also you make me feel seen, like I matter. No one has made me feel that way since my family died." Carter closed his eyes briefly, clearly wrestling with himself. When he opened them again, there was a resolve in his expression. When we get to Virginia City, after you have given your testimony and had time to rest and think clearly, if you still feel this way, then we will talk about it. But not now. Not when everything is so uncertain. It was the honorable thing to do, and Olivia knew he was right even though part of her wanted to protest. So she simply nodded and turned back to watch the fire, even as every nerve in her body was aware of his presence beside her. They reached Virginia City late the following afternoon, riding into town on Carter's horse with the sun sinking behind the mountains. The town was much larger than Bannack, a bustling mining settlement with wide streets and substantial buildings that spoke of real money and permanence. Carter led them directly to the territorial marshal's office, a solid structure near the center of town. Marshal Robert Hartley was a grizzled man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Olivia's story with growing intensity, asking pointed questions and taking careful notes. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. Those deputies have been suspected of various crimes for years, but we never had proof. If you are willing to testify, Miss Drummond, we can finally bring them to justice. But I will not lie to you, it will not be easy. They have friends and allies, and you will be putting yourself at risk. I understand, but I have to do this. That marshal they killed, he deserves justice. And if I do not testify, those men will keep hurting people. You are a brave woman. I will send deputies to Bannack tomorrow to make arrests. In the meantime, you should stay somewhere safe. The hotel across the street is respectable, and I will make sure they know to keep an eye out for trouble. Carter insisted on paying for Olivia's room at the hotel over her protests. You can pay me back when you get back on your feet, he said firmly. For now, you need rest and safety, and I have enough money to cover a few nights. The hotel room was simple but clean, with a real bed and a basin for washing. After days in the wilderness, it felt impossibly luxurious. Carter left her there with promises to check on her the next day, and Olivia found herself alone for the first time since he had found her on the mountain summit. She washed the grime from her skin and hair, marveling at how much dirt came away, and then examined herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked like she had been through a war, her face thin and marked with healing cuts, her hair tangled despite her attempts to comb it. But she was alive and safe, and that was what mattered. Sleep came easily that night, deep and undisturbed, and when Olivia woke the next morning, she felt more like herself than she had in days. She dressed in the spare clothes that the hotel proprietor's wife had loaned her, a simple dress that was a bit too large but clean and whole. Then she made her way downstairs to find Carter waiting for her in the hotel dining room. He stood when she entered, his face breaking into a smile. You look rested. How do you feel? Better. Much better. Thank you for the room, Carter. I will find a way to repay you. We can worry about that later. Right now, I thought you might like some breakfast, real food, not trail rations. They ate together, plates piled with eggs and bacon and fresh bread, and talked about everything except the complicated feelings between them. Olivia told him about her plans to look for work in Virginia City, maybe as a seamstress or a cook, something respectable that would let her start building a life again. Carter listened and offered suggestions, clearly trying to be helpful even though Olivia could see the shadow in his eyes, the knowledge that he would be leaving soon to return to his work in the mountains. After breakfast, Marshal Hartley sent word that he wanted to go over Olivia's testimony again, to make sure every detail was recorded accurately. Carter walked with her to the marshal's office and then excused himself, saying he had business to attend to in town. Olivia spent the next several hours with the marshal, recounting every moment of that terrible night in Bannack, answering questions until she was exhausted. When she finally emerged from the office, she found Carter waiting outside, leaning against the building with his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. He straightened when he saw her, concern evident in his expression. "How did it go?" "It went well. The marshal says he has enough to build a strong case. His deputies left for Bannack this morning, and they should return with the prisoners within a few days." "That is good news. You must be relieved." "I am, but I am also nervous. What if they do not convict? What if those deputies have enough influence to get away with murder?" "They will not. You are a credible witness, and Marshal Hartley is a good man. Justice will be served." They walked through town together, Carter pointing out various shops and businesses, helping Olivia get her bearings in this new place. He introduced her to the owner of a boarding house, who had a reputation for being kind to women in difficult circumstances, and Olivia made arrangements to move there once her testimony was complete. Carter also took her to a general store and insisted on buying her a few supplies, practical things like a warm coat and sturdy boots, necessities that she would need for winter in Montana. "You do not have to do all this," Olivia protested, as Carter paid for the items. "You have already done so much for me. I want to make sure you are taken care of. Call it selfish, but I will worry less if I know you have what you need." "When are you leaving?" The question came out more abruptly than Olivia intended, but she needed to know. Carter's expression grew somber. "Tomorrow, most likely. I have been away from my work for almost a week, and I need to get back to those wild horses before someone else catches them. But I will come back to Virginia City in a few weeks to check on you and make sure everything is all right." "Just a few weeks." "Maybe sooner if I can manage it." They were standing in the middle of the street, people flowing around them, but for that moment, it felt like they were completely alone. Carter reached out and took Olivia's hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a gesture that was both tentative and tender. "I meant what I said before. When everything is settled, when you have had time to think clearly about what you want, we will talk. Really talk. About possibilities and futures and what might be between us." "I already know what I want," Olivia said softly. "I want you. I want this, whatever this is. I know it is fast and probably foolish, but Carter, I have never felt this way about anyone. These past few days with you have been the happiest I have been since before my family died, and that is not just because you saved my life. It is because of who you are." Carter's grip on her hand tightened. "Olivia, I feel the same way. But I leave tomorrow, and you need time to build a life here, to figure out who you are when you are not running for your life. I do not want us to rush into something and then regret it. So, what are we supposed to do? Say goodbye and hope that what we feel survives a few weeks of separation?" "I hope it does more than survive. I hope it grows. And when I come back, if you still want me, then we will figure out how to make this work." It was not the declaration Olivia wanted, but she understood his reasoning. Carter was trying to be honorable, to give her space and time to be sure of her feelings. So she squeezed his hand and nodded, even though her heart was aching at the thought of him leaving. They spent the rest of that day together, walking through Virginia City and talking about everything and nothing. Carter told her stories about the wild horses he had been tracking, describing their beauty and wildness with obvious admiration. Olivia talked about her dreams for the future, modest hopes for a quiet life and honest work, maybe someday a family of her own. As evening fell, Carter walked her back to the hotel. They stood outside in the gathering darkness, neither wanting to say goodbye but knowing they had to. "I will be back before you know it," Carter promised, "and I will write if I can find someone heading to town who can deliver a letter. I will be here, building that life we talked about, getting my bearings, and thinking of me, I hope, every day." Carter reached up and cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. For a moment, Olivia thought he might kiss her, and she held her breath, wanting it desperately. But then he simply leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, a gesture of affection that was somehow more intimate than any kiss could have been. "Stay safe, Olivia Drummond, and wait for me. I will, I promise." Then he was turning away, walking back toward the stable where his horse was kept, and Olivia stood watching until he disappeared into the darkness. Only then did she allow herself to cry, tears streaming down her face as she mourned the temporary loss of something precious she had only just found. The next 3 weeks were some of the longest of Olivia's life. Marshal Hartley's deputies returned from Bannack with the 3 corrupt lawmen in custody, and the trial was scheduled quickly. Olivia testified, standing before a packed courtroom and telling her story with as much detail as she could remember. The defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggesting she was confused or lying, but Marshal Hartley's investigation had turned up additional evidence of the deputies' crimes, and the jury convicted them in less than an hour of deliberation. When the verdicts were read, Olivia felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying since that terrible night. Justice had been served, and while it could not bring back the murdered marshal, at least his killers would face consequences for their actions. With the trial behind her, Olivia threw herself into building a new life in Virginia City. She found work as a seamstress, taking in mending and alterations from the townspeople, and slowly building a reputation for quality work. The pay was modest, but it was enough to cover her room at the boarding house and buy necessities. She made friends with some of the other women in town, cautiously at first and then with more confidence as she realized that she was truly safe here, that no one was coming after her. But through all of it, she thought of Carter constantly. Every morning she woke wondering if this would be the day he returned. Every evening she felt the ache of his absence. She had known him for such a short time, but he had become essential to her in a way that defied logic. She replayed their conversations in her mind, remembering the way he looked at her, the gentleness in his touch, the promises he had made. On a cold morning in early November, Olivia was working in her small room at the boarding house, hemming a dress for one of the town's wealthier residents, when there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find the boarding house owner, Mrs. Patterson, standing there with a knowing smile. "You have a visitor downstairs, dear. A young man who looks like he has been riding hard to get here." Olivia's heart leaped into her throat. She set down her sewing and hurried downstairs, not even bothering to check her appearance in the mirror. Carter was waiting in the front parlor, dusty from travel and tired-looking, but his face broke into a brilliant smile when he saw her. "Olivia." She crossed the room without thinking and threw herself into his arms, and Carter caught her and held her tight, his face pressed into her hair. "I missed you," he said against her ear. "Every single day I missed you. I missed you too, so much." They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, and Olivia felt complete in a way she had not since he left. Eventually they separated enough to look at each other properly, and Olivia saw that Carter's expression was serious. "I have been thinking," he said. "For 3 weeks I thought about nothing except you and what I want my life to look like, and I realized something important." "What is that?" "I do not want to be alone anymore. I do not want to spend my life chasing wild horses through the mountains with no one to come home to. I want a partner, a companion, someone to share all of this with, and I want that person to be you if you will have me." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying that I am in love with you, Olivia Drummond. I think I started falling the moment I saw you drag yourself over that summit, refusing to give up even when any sane person would have." And every minute I spent with you after that just made me more certain. So yes, I am saying exactly what you think I am saying. I want to marry you if you will have me." "Yes," Olivia said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." Carter let out a breath he seemed to have been holding and pulled her close again. And this time, when he tilted her face up to his, he did kiss her. It was a gentle kiss at first, tentative and sweet, but it quickly deepened into something more passionate, a physical expression of all the longing and love they had both been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Olivia was laughing through her tears. "I love you too," she said. "I should have told you before you left, but I was afraid it was too soon, too fast. It does not feel too fast to me. It feels exactly right." They spent the rest of that day making plans. Carter had decided to change the focus of his work, settling closer to Virginia City, and building up a small ranch where he could breed and train horses, rather than constantly chasing wild herds through the mountains. He had found a good piece of land about 10 miles outside of town, with a creek running through it and good grazing, and he had enough money saved to start building. It would mean hard work and long days, but it also meant a stable home and a real future. "I want you to see the land before we make any final decisions," Carter said. "Make sure you like it. It will be your home too." So they rode out the next day, Olivia sitting behind Carter on his buckskin gelding, her arms wrapped around his waist. The land was everything he had promised, a beautiful valley sheltered by low hills, with the creek providing year-round water and plenty of room for a house and barn. Olivia fell in love with it immediately, already imagining where they might build, how they could lay out corrals and pastures. "It is perfect," she told Carter. "I can see our whole life here." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Virginia City Church, with Marshall Hartley serving as witness and Mrs. Patterson crying happy tears in the front pew. Olivia wore a dress she had sewn herself, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Carter wore his best suit, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes. But when they exchanged vows, speaking promises of love and faithfulness, there was no discomfort, only certainty and joy. The winter months that followed were a time of hard work and deep happiness. Carter began building their house with help from hired men and neighbors who appeared to lend a hand. Olivia continued her sewing work to bring in extra money, and in her spare time she helped with the construction, learning skills she had never imagined needing. They lived in a tent near the building site, huddled together for warmth on cold nights, and Olivia found that she did not mind the primitive conditions because she was with Carter. By spring, the house was finished, a solid 2-room cabin with a stone fireplace and real glass windows. It was modest, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and filled with their dreams for the future. They moved in on a bright April morning, carrying their few possessions across the threshold, and Carter insisted on carrying Olivia across as well, both of them laughing at the old tradition. That first night in their new home, lying in their own bed with the fire crackling in the hearth, Olivia felt a contentment that she had never thought possible after losing her family. She had found a new family in Carter, had built a new life from the ashes of tragedy, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "What are you thinking about?" Carter asked, his arm around her shoulders. "About how lucky I am, how lucky we are. A year ago I was alone and afraid, and now I have you and this beautiful place and a future that looks bright. I am the lucky one. You are the strongest person I have ever met, Olivia. You survived something that would have broken most people, and you came out the other side still kind and hopeful. That takes real courage. I had help. I had you. We had each other. That is how it is supposed to work." Over the following years, their ranch grew and prospered. Carter's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and he was soon getting orders from ranchers across Montana and even into Wyoming. Olivia expanded her sewing business, eventually hiring 2 young women from Virginia City to help with the workload. They were building something real and lasting, and they did it together, partners in every sense of the word. In the spring of 1878, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure, memories of losing her family making her afraid to hope for too much. But Carter was a rock of support, his confidence helping her through the difficult early months. He talked to their baby every night, his hand on her growing belly, telling stories about the horses and the mountains and the life they would share. Their son was born in December, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's determination. They named him Samuel, after Olivia's father, and from the moment Carter held him for the first time, Olivia knew that their family was complete in a way that went beyond biology. This was a family forged through survival and choice and love, and it was stronger for it. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic child who loved horses as much as his father did. By the time he was 3, he was riding his own pony around the ranch, fearless and confident. Olivia watched him with a mixture of pride and amazement, grateful every day for the life they had built. In 1881, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Clara after Carter's mother. She was quieter than Samuel, more thoughtful, but with a stubborn streak that made both her parents laugh. With 2 children, the little cabin felt cramped, so Carter and Olivia decided to expand, adding 2 more rooms and a covered porch that ran the length of the house. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters when money was tight, summers when drought threatened their water supply, and the constant challenges of running a ranch in rough country. But they faced every obstacle together, and the difficulties only seemed to make them stronger as a couple. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Carter surprised Olivia by taking her back to Eagle's Peak. They left the children with Mrs. Patterson, who had become like a grandmother to them, and rode into the mountains on a beautiful summer morning. It took them a full day to reach the summit, and when they stood at the spot where Carter had first found Olivia, they looked out over the vast landscape with shared wonder. "You remember what you were thinking when you reached this summit?" Carter asked. "I remember thinking I could not possibly climb 1 more foot, and then I remember seeing you and being terrified that you were one of the men chasing me. And now I look at this place and think about how everything can change in a single moment. How your whole life can pivot on one decision, one chance meeting. If you had not been here that day, I would have died on this mountain. But I was here, and you were here, and everything that has happened since has been because we found each other." They stayed on the summit until sunset, watching the shadows lengthen across the valleys below, talking about their life and their children and their dreams for the future. Then they made their way back down, not the dangerous descent of that first night, but a leisurely hike filled with conversation and laughter. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges and moments of pure joy. Samuel grew into a young man who took over more and more of the ranch work, eventually marrying a girl from Virginia City and building his own house on the far side of the property. Clara showed a talent for art, painting landscapes that captured the wild beauty of Montana in ways that made people stop and stare. She took over Olivia's sewing business and expanded it to include dressmaking and design, creating gowns that were worn at the finest occasions in Virginia City and beyond. Carter and Olivia watched their children build their own lives with pride, grateful for every moment they had together as a family. They became grandparents, welcoming Samuel's children and eventually Clara's as well, and their home was filled with the sound of young voices and laughter. On a quiet evening in the fall of 1895, 20 years after that desperate climb up Eagle's Peak, Carter and Olivia sat together on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. They were both older now, with gray in their hair and lines on their faces, but the love between them had only deepened with time. "Do you ever think about how different your life might have been?" Olivia asked. "If you had not been on that mountain that day? If you had been somewhere else tracking different horses?" "I think about it sometimes," Carter admitted, "but I do not dwell on it because what is the point? I was there and you were there and we found each other. That is the only reality that matters. I used to be angry about what those deputies did, about being forced to run for my life. But now I think maybe it was meant to happen exactly the way it did, because it led me to you and to this life, and I would not trade it for anything, not even for having your family back." Olivia considered the question seriously. "If I could have both my original family and this life with you, of course I would choose that. But I cannot. And given the choice between never losing them but never meeting you, or losing them but finding you, I honestly do not know what I would choose." "Does that make me a terrible person?" "It makes you human. And it makes sense. We cannot live in hypotheticals. We can only live in the reality we have and make the most of it." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped together, watching as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. From inside the house came the sound of their grandchildren playing, looked after by Clara while their parents worked. It was the sound of continuity, of life moving forward in the best possible way. "I love you, Olivia Finnegan," Carter said, using her married name with obvious pleasure even after 20 years. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you refuse to give up on that mountain, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond. I love you too, Carter Finnegan. You saved my life that day, but more than that, you gave me a reason to live. You gave me hope and joy and a family, and I am grateful for every single moment we have shared." As the stars multiplied overhead and the night deepened around them, they remained on the porch, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. The mountain loomed in the distance, silent and eternal, keeper of the secret of how their story had begun. But the mountain was just the beginning. The real story was in every year that followed, in every challenge overcome, and every joy celebrated together. Their grandchildren would grow up hearing the tale of how Grandma Olivia had climbed a mountain to escape bad men, and how Grandpa Carter had met her at the top and led her down. They would hear about the desperate flight through the wilderness and the trial that brought justice to corrupt lawmen. But more importantly, they would see every day the evidence of a love that had survived and thrived, that had created a legacy of strength and devotion that would carry on long after Carter and Olivia were gone. In the years that followed that anniversary evening, Carter and Olivia gradually stepped back from the active running of the ranch, leaving it in Samuel's capable hands while they enjoyed the slower pace of their later years. They took trips together, revisiting places that held special meaning and exploring new corners of Montana. They attended their grandchildren's school performances and birthday celebrations, reveling in the simple pleasure of watching another generation grow and flourish. When Clara married a young lawyer from Helena in 1898, it was a grand celebration that brought together people from across Montana. The wedding took place at the ranch, under the open sky, and as Olivia watched her daughter exchange vows with the man she loved, she felt the circle of their story completing itself. This was what she and Carter had built, Not just a successful ranch or a comfortable life, but a family rooted in love and strength. Carter's health began to decline in his 60s, the hard years of ranch work taking their toll on his body. But even as his physical strength waned, his spirit remained as strong as ever. He spent his days teaching his grandchildren about horses, passing on the knowledge and skill that had defined his life. Olivia was always by his side, her presence a constant source of comfort and joy. On a spring morning in 1902, Carter asked Olivia to take a walk with him around the ranch. He moved slowly now, leaning on a cane, but there was determination in his step. They walked past the corrals where Samuel was working with a young mare, past Clara's house, where her children played in the yard, and finally to the spot near the creek where they had first stood together all those years ago, imagining their future. "This is what I saw that day," Carter said, looking around at all they had built. "When I stood here with you and talked about building a ranch, this is exactly what I saw in my mind. And we did it, Olivia. We made it all real." "We did," Olivia agreed, her arm around his waist, supporting him. "We made something beautiful." Carter turned to face her, his hands cupping her face the way he had on that night in Virginia City when he left her at the hotel. His hands were gnarled with arthritis now, but his touch was still gentle, still filled with love. "I want you to know," he said seriously, "that every single day with you has been a gift. You have been my partner and my love and my best friend, and I am so grateful that I was on that mountain the day you needed help. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." "Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me too," Olivia replied, tears streaming down her face. "We have had a good life, Carter Finnegan, the best possible life." They stood together by the creek, holding each other as the water burbled past and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Around them was everything they had built together: the house, the corrals, the family that bore their legacy. It was more than either of them had dared to dream of on that mountain summit 27 years ago, and it was absolutely everything they needed. Carter lived another 3 years, surrounded by love and family until the end. When he passed peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1905, Olivia grieved deeply, but without bitterness. They had been given nearly 30 years together, years filled with love and laughter and the satisfaction of building something that would endure. She missed him terribly, but she took comfort in knowing that their story had been complete, that nothing had been left unsaid or undone between them. Olivia lived another 15 years, staying on the ranch and watching her grandchildren grow into adults with children of their own. She told stories about Carter to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive through words and shared remembrances. She painted with Clara, sharing quiet afternoons in the studio Clara had built behind her house. She rode horses with Samuel's children, teaching them the skills Carter had taught their father. And sometimes, on clear summer days, Olivia would ride out to Eagle's Peak and climb partway up the southern slope, as far as her aging body would allow. She would sit on a sunny rock and look out at the vast Montana landscape, remembering the desperate girl who had scrambled up this mountain with men trying to kill her, and the cowboy who had been waiting at the summit to save her life and steal her heart. When Olivia passed away in her sleep in 1920 at the age of 67, she was surrounded by 3 generations of family, all of them products of the love she had shared with Carter. They buried her next to him in the small cemetery on the ranch property, under a stone that bore both their names and a simple inscription: "Together they climbed mountains." The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's stewardship, and later his children's, remaining in the Finnegan family for generations. The story of how it all began, how Olivia Drummond climbed a mountain to escape bad men, and how Carter Finnegan met her at the top and led her down, was passed from parents to children to grandchildren, becoming part of the family's foundational mythology. But more than just a story, it became a symbol of what was possible when courage met compassion, when desperation met kindness, when two people who should have been strangers became soulmates. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found, and that sometimes salvation came in the form of a cowboy standing on a mountain summit, ready to extend a helping hand and offer a future neither of them could have imagined. The wild Montana landscape that had been the backdrop for their meeting continued to stand eternal and unchanged, mountains reaching toward the sky, valleys stretching into the distance, beauty and harshness existing side by side. And somewhere in that vastness, carried on the wind and written in the stones, was the echo of a love story that had begun with a desperate climb and ended with a legacy that would last forever. Their great-great-grandchildren still ranch that same land today, working the earth and raising horses just as Carter did over a century ago. They know the story of Eagle's Peak, of the grandmother who ran for her life and the grandfather who saved her. They know about the corrupt deputies and the trial and the justice that was served. But most of all, they know about the love that grew from that chance meeting, the partnership that built something lasting, and the family that resulted from one moment of grace on a mountain summit. In the end, that is what mattered most. Not the danger or the drama or even the triumph over evil, but the simple fact that two people found each other when they needed it most and chose to build a life together. That choice, made and remade every day for 30 years, created ripples that extended far beyond their own lifetimes, touching people who would never meet them but would benefit from the example of their love and their commitment to each other. The mountain still stands, tall and imposing, watching over the valley where the Finnegan Ranch sits nestled among the hills. And if you listen carefully on quiet evenings, when the wind moves through the pines and the creek sings its ancient song, you might hear echoes of a story that began with a woman climbing toward salvation and a man waiting to guide her home.